The stars in the Varath sector had always been beautiful. They were the kind of stars that looked peaceful from a distance, soft, white, and quiet. But tonight, those stars were being blocked out by fire. Ships were burning. Coalition vessels twisted and broke apart in the vacuum of space. Explosions bloomed like flowers, bright and terrible, then died just as fast. Debris drifted in every direction, hull plating, engine parts, and things that were harder to look at. And the battle had been going on for 9 hours, and the coalition was losing badly. Admiral Seo Jinha stood at the command window of his flagship, the CFS Resolute Dawn, and watched his fleet fall apart. He was a tall man, lean and weathered, with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too much war. He did not panic. He had trained himself not to panic a long time ago, but even he could feel the cold weight settling in his chest as he watched another cruiser go dark. Admiral, his tactical officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Hana, spoke quietly from her station. We have lost 14 ships in the last 2 hours. The Draknor are pushing through our left flank. If they break through, we will be completely surrounded. Seo Jinha already knew that. He had known it for the last hour. He just had not said it out loud because saying it out loud would make it real. What is the status of the distress signal? He asked. Hana paused before answering. That pause told him everything. The signal has been broadcasting for 6 hours, Admiral. We have received no response from any coalition member world. The nearest friendly fleet is 11 hours away. 11 hours. They would not last 11 hours. Not at this rate. Outside, another ship exploded. So Jinha watched it go, the CFS Bright Current. He had known her captain. A good man. A careful man. It had not mattered in the end. The Draknor supremacy had planned this attack well. They had drawn the coalition fleet deep into the Varath sector with false intelligence, a fake retreat that had looked real enough to follow, and then they had closed the trap. Warlord Grath had assembled an armada that was twice the size of anything the coalition had expected. Heavy dreadnoughts, fast destroyer wings, and long-range artillery ships that were hammering the coalition vessels from a distance too great to effectively return fire. Grath was good at this. He had broken 3 coalition fleets in the last 2 years. He was patient, methodical, and completely without mercy. On the Draknor command ship, the supremacy of Grath, the warlord himself stood at the center of his battle chamber and watched the fight with calm satisfaction. He was massive, even for a Draknor. Dark-scaled skin, 4 arms, a wide jaw full of flat grinding teeth. His people were not built for speed or elegance. They were built for endurance and force. They fought the way mountains fought. They just kept pressing until the other side broke. They are still broadcasting their distress signal, one of his officers reported. Grath made a low sound in his chest. It was almost a laugh. Let them! No one is coming. Their nearest allies are too far away, and every other species in this sector is too afraid of us to respond. He turned back to the holographic display. How long until we have them fully enclosed? 40 minutes, to us, Warlord. Good. He clasped 2 of his 4 hands behind his back. We finish this before the next cycle. I want that sector cleared. Back on the CFS Resolute Dawn, Seo Jinha made a decision. He was not going to wait to die in place. If they were going to lose, they were going to lose moving. All ships, he said into the fleet-wide channel, we are breaking left. We push through the Draknor destroyer line and take whatever opening we can find. It will not be clean. The long-range scanner station erupted in noise. Admiral! A sensor operator named Ensign Pak shot up from his chair so fast he nearly knocked it over. His voice was high and strange. I am picking up signals, unknown signatures, coming from the dark region, bearing 274 by -40. Seo Jinha turned fast. Define unknown. They do not match any coalition ship class. Pak's fingers flew across his panel. They do not match any Draknor configuration either. I have never seen these signatures before. He looked up, his face pale and confused. Admiral, there are a lot of them. How many? Pa stared at his screen. He read the number. Then he read it again, because he did not believe it the first time. 112 vessels, Admiral, and they are still coming out of the dark region. The count is still rising. The bridge went very quiet. General Yun Daisel, The Coalition Ground Forces commander, who had been stationed aboard the flagship during the space engagement, stepped up beside Seo Jinha. He was a broad-shouldered man with a square jaw and a deep frown that seemed permanently set into his face. "Another Draknor force?" he said. "No." Seo Jinha shook his head slowly. "Grath would not need more ships. He already has us." He looked at the scanner feed, and the signatures were unlike anything in the Coalition database. They were large. Some of them were very large, and they were moving with purpose. "Get me a visual." It took the system 30 seconds to resolve the images from that distance. When it did, the whole bridge crew stared in silence. The ships were dark, not the dull gray of Coalition vessels or the deep bronze of Draknor warships. These ships were almost black, the color of deep water, shaped in hard, angular lines and long sweeping hulls. They looked nothing like the smooth, curved forms that most spacefaring civilizations had settled on over centuries of design. They looked like weapons. They looked like they had been built by someone who had thought very carefully about the most efficient way to cause destruction and had then built exactly that. "Who are they?" General Yoon asked. The answer came before anyone on the bridge could speak. "Not needed help. We are moving to engage needed help. We are moving to engage. Please hold your current position." The bridge erupted. Everyone spoke at once. Seo Jinha held up one hand and the noise died down. He stood very still for a moment, processing what he had just heard. Then he said quietly, "Earth." General Yoon turned to look at him. "Earth? Oh, the humans?" His frown deepened. "They are not Coalition members. We rejected their application." "Yes," Seo Jinha said simply. "We did." 8 years ago, the Galactic Coalition had reviewed Earth's request for membership. The humans had only had faster-than-light travel for 30 years. They were new. Their civilization was young and, by galactic standards, small. The Coalition Review Board had examined their history and found it troubling. Thousands of years of war among themselves. A planet that had nearly destroyed its own environment multiple times. A species defined, more than almost any other, by conflict. The vote had not been close. Too primitive, too violent, too unpredictable. Earth's application had been denied, and the Coalition had moved on. And now, 8 years later, the Terran Defense Fleet was sailing out of the dark with 127 ships. The count was still rising. Into a battle they had no obligation to enter. "So they came," Seo Jinha said, mostly to himself. On the Draknor command ship, the sudden appearance of the unknown fleet had caused the first moment of real disorder Warlord Grath had allowed in hours. His officers were shouting numbers at him. His scanner team was trying to identify the new arrivals. His tactical commanders were arguing about whether to break off the Coalition assault to deal with the new threat. Grath silenced them all with a single raised hand. "It's the Earth," one of his intelligence officers said, pulling up records. "They are a young species, Terrans. Their world is in the outer regions. They are not Coalition members. They have no alliance with anyone in this sector." He looked up. "Warlord, we have no intelligence on their military capabilities. They were never considered a threat." Grath looked at the visual feed. He looked at the black ships. He thought about a species that had been rejected by the most powerful political body in the galaxy because they were considered too backward and too violent. And then Warlord Grath did something that would later be remembered as the greatest mistake of his long and celebrated military career. He laughed. It was a deep, rolling sound, full of genuine amusement. Around him, his officers joined in, nervously at first, and then with more confidence, taking their cue from him. "Hro, the primitives have come to die with their friends," Grath said. He waved one of his large hands dismissively. "Ignore them for now. Finish enclosing the Coalition fleet first. We will deal with Earth after." His officers turned back to their stations, still chuckling. On the scanner feed, the Terran fleet continued to advance. Back on the CFS Resolute Dawn, Seo Jinha watched the black ships come. They were moving in a formation he did not recognize. Not a standard line formation, not a wedge. It was something more complex, something layered, with smaller fast ships at the edges and the massive vessels in the center rear, angled in a way that made no obvious sense to his trained eye. Ensign Pak looked up from his scanner. "Admiral, the Terran fleet count is now 141 ships. The largest vessels are registering mass displacement greater than anything in the Coalition or Draknor fleets. He swallowed. Some of those ships are very big. Much, sir. General Yoon was still frowning. He would later admit privately that he had not stopped frowning for that entire hour. What are they doing? He muttered, watching the formation. What is that pattern? Seo Jinha did not answer. He did not know. But something about watching those dark ships move, something about the quiet certainty of their advance, the way they did not rush or scatter or break, made the cold weight in his chest feel a little less heavy. Oh, a second transmission came through. Same calm voice, same perfect galactic standard. Coalition flagship, this is Fleet Commander Kang Mirai of the Terran Defense Fleet. We are 2 minutes from weapons range. We recommend you use this time to pull your damaged vessels back behind our line. We will cover the withdrawal. Do you copy? Seo Jinha straightened. He reached forward and opened the channel himself. This is Admiral Seo Jinha, Coalition Defense Fleet. We copy, Fleet Commander. He paused, and there were things he wanted to say. A lot of things. They could wait. We will begin withdrawal now. And Commander? Admiral? He looked out at the black ships coming out of the dark. Thank you. There was a brief pause on the other end. Then simply, don't thank us yet. The fight hasn't started. The channel closed. Seo Jinha turned to his helmsman. Begin withdrawal. All damaged vessels fall back behind the Terran line. He looked at the scanner one more time. 141 black ships, moving in a formation no one on his bridge could name, advancing without hesitation toward the largest Draknor armada seen in years. He had no idea what was about to happen, but for the first time in 9 hours, he did not feel like a man waiting to die. Outside, the stars were still burning, but something new was coming through the dark, and it was not afraid. Ambassador Velshan had been in space for 40 years. He had visited 31 worlds. He negotiated 9 treaties and stood on the bridge of a coalition flagship during 2 separate engagements with Draknor forces. He was not a man who was easily surprised. He had seen most of what the galaxy had to offer, and he had formed careful, considered opinions about nearly all of it. He had an opinion about Earth, too. He had helped write the report that recommended denying their coalition application 8 years ago. Too violent, too unpredictable. Their own history showed it clearly. Or whatever potential the species might have, they were not ready. The galaxy was not ready for them. That opinion was now sitting very uncomfortably in his mind as the shuttle he was riding carried him toward the Terran flagship. The shuttle was a coalition vessel. It had been sent over after Fleet Commander Kang Mirai's second transmission, a polite and precise message offering to transport any senior coalition personnel to the TNS Iron Horizon for coordination purposes. Who these people are and what they actually want. What Velshan had expected, if he was being honest, was something modest. Humans were young. Their technology was limited, or so the coalition had always assumed. He had expected a functional but unimpressive warship, something comparable to a mid-tier coalition cruiser perhaps, enough to help in a small way. He had been quietly grateful for the help, even if he expected it to be limited. What he saw when the shuttle came around the bow of the TNS Iron Horizon made him go very still in his seat. The ship was enormous. It was one of the longest vessels he had ever seen, and he had visited the coalition's own supercarriers. But it was not just the size, it was the shape. Every other warship he had ever seen, coalition or otherwise, had a certain logic to its design. These smooth curves where energy flow required it, flat panels where armor was plated, functional geometry. The Iron Horizon looked like it had been designed by someone who had decided that every single surface of the ship would serve a purpose, and then had followed that principle with total commitment. Every angle was deliberate. The hull was layered, not flat, with overlapping sections that caught the light in ways that made it hard to judge the exact dimensions. Weapons arrays were positioned in overlapping fields that would cover each other. Point defense grids ringed the ship at intervals too precise and too numerous to count at a glance. It looked, Velshan thought, like something built by people who had spent a very long time thinking about war. The shuttle docked. Velshan was met at the hangar entrance by a young officer in a dark uniform. The officer was human, compact and professional, With close-cropped hair and the particular kind of stillness that Velshan associated with soldiers who had been through difficult things and come out the other side intact. Ambassador Velshan, the officer said, I'm Lieutenant Cha Junho. Fleet Commander Kang Mirai asked me to escort you. She is on the bridge. Please follow me. Velshan followed. The inside of the ship matched the outside. Clean, precise, purposeful. No wasted space, no decorative elements. Every corridor had equipment mounted on the walls, screens showing live data feeds, conduits running overhead with careful organization. The crew they passed moved quickly and quietly. No one was running, but no one was standing still either. The whole ship had the feeling of a machine running at optimal efficiency. They passed through a section of the ship that opened into a wide observation platform, a long transparent section of hull that looked out at the battle still unfolding in the distance. Coalition ships were withdrawing, Draknor vessels were pressing forward, and arrayed between them were the other Terran ships, holding position in that complex formation Seojina's bridge crew had been unable to identify. Velshan stopped walking for a moment and stared. The Terran formation made sense now that he could see it from the inside. The smaller, faster ships at the outer edges were positioned to intercept anything that came around the flanks. The mid-sized vessels in the layered middle were angled so that their weapons could fire past each other without hitting friendly ships. And the massive vessels in the center rear were positioned so that their weapons, whatever those weapons were, had a clear line to virtually any point in the engagement zone. It was not a defensive formation, and it was not an offensive one. Honestly, it was both at the same time, and it had clearly been designed to be held precisely until the right moment. Did you plan this formation before you arrived? Velshan asked. Cha Junho glanced at him. Yes, sir. Commander Kang Mirai runs pre-engagement simulations on every expected combat environment. We had data on the Varith sector's spatial geography before we jumped in. The formation was already mapped. You simulated this battle before you arrived. Multiple versions of it, Cha Junho said simply. Please, sir, the commander is waiting. The bridge of the TNS Iron Horizon was large but not loud. That surprised Velshan. Most flagship bridges he had visited were busy, noisy places during combat situations. Officers shouting, alarms sounding, the controlled chaos of a crew under pressure. This bridge was quiet. Tial stood Fleet Commander Kang Mirai. Shial stood Fleet Commander Kang Mirai. She was not what Velshan had pictured when he imagined the commander of Earth's secret fleet. She was shorter than average, with straight black hair pulled back from her face, and dark, steady eyes that were currently moving across 3 separate tactical displays simultaneously. She looked young, younger than he expected, but there was nothing uncertain about her. She stood at the center of that bridge the way a fixed point stands at the center of a turning wheel. Everything moved around her, and she did not move at all. She noticed him without looking away from her screens. Ambassador, thank you for coming aboard. She gestured to a position beside her. Stand here. You can see everything from this point. He walked over and stood beside her. She was right. From that position, the main display showed the full tactical picture. The coalition withdrawal, the Draknor advance, the Terran formation holding perfectly. Your ship, Velshan said after a moment. It is not what we expected. I imagine not, Kang Mirai said. How long have you been building this fleet? She was quiet for a moment, not because she was reluctant to answer, but because she was also simultaneously monitoring a data feed from one of the outer picket ships. She made a small gesture to Cha Junho, who immediately adjusted something on the tactical display. Then she answered. After the coalition rejected Earth's application, our government made a decision. If we were not going to be protected by an alliance, we would protect ourselves. We started the fleet construction program 6 years ago. The first designs were finished in year 2. The first ships were completed in year 4. We have been running drills and war games ever since. Velshan looked at the display. 141 warships. 6 years. You built all of this in 6 years? When humans decide to build something, she said, we tend to focus on it. But the weapons, the technology, some of what I am seeing in the external scans does not match any known system in the galactic database. Because we developed them ourselves, she said. When we did not have access to coalition technology after the rejection, we had to start from our own principles. She paused and glanced at him for the first time since he had arrived on the bridge. It turned out not to be a disadvantage. We thought about the problem differently. The Draknor have excellent energy shield technology. Almost every weapon in the galactic arsenal is energy-based. So we went a different way. Kinetic weapons, Velshan said slowly. And he had read that in the preliminary scan data. Mass drivers. Among other things, their shields absorb energy. They do not absorb mass moving at high velocity. She looked back at the display. We also developed, it is not perfect, but it is better than anything that operates on a fixed approach program. Velshan stared at the display for a long time. The Draknor were still advancing, still pressing the coalition withdrawal, still unaware of what was waiting for them. You came here, he said finally. Earth owes the coalition nothing. We rejected you. We told you that you were not good enough. And you came anyway. Kang Mirai did not answer immediately. She watched a data point on the screen. She checked something and then folded her hands behind her back. Your people were dying, she said, and no one else came. It was the simplest answer he had ever been given to a complicated question, and he found, standing there on the bridge of a ship that should not have existed, that he had no response to it. On the far side of the engagement zone, the Draknor continued to advance. Cha Junho looked up from his station. Commander, just Draknor forward, elements are entering weapons range in 90 seconds. Kang Mirai straightened. She looked at the display one last time, checking the formation, checking the positions, checking the lines of fire. Everything was where it was supposed to be. The months of simulation, the years of construction, the long and quiet preparation in the dark. All of it had led to exactly this moment. All batteries to readiness, she said. Her voice was calm and even. It did not rise or fall. It was simply a statement of fact given to people who knew what to do with it. Across the Terran fleet, weapon systems that had never been fired in real combat powered to life. The hum of charging capacitors moved through the hull of every ship. Targeting systems locked onto Draknor vessels. Torpedo bays opened silently in the vacuum of space. The Draknor did not notice. They were still pressing forward, still confident, still laughing at the primitives who had come to die. Kima, 30 seconds, Cha Junho said. Velshan gripped the edge of the console in front of him. He was not a soldier. He had never been in a real engagement. He had observed battles from safety before, but this felt different. This felt like standing at the edge of a very high place and looking down. Kang Mirai looked at the display. Fire, she said. The TNS Iron Horizon shook, not from being hit, but from its own weapons discharging for the very first time. The sound that moved through the hull was deep and enormous, like the world shifting beneath your feet. And the battle began. Outside, in the dark of the Varath sector, the weapons of Earth spoke for the first time. The galaxy would not forget the sound. The first salvo from the Terran fleet did not look like what anyone expected. There were no beams of light, no pulses of visible energy spreading across the dark. When the Draknor fired, their weapons were bright, were dramatic things, purple and red lances of focused energy that were visible from thousands of kilometers away. Beautiful, in their terrible way. When the coalition fired, their weapons glowed blue-white, cutting lines through the black. The Terran fleet fired, and the space between them and the Draknor simply became full of things moving very fast. That was the only way to describe it at first. Objects dark and dense, crossing the gap between the two fleets at velocities that pushed the upper boundary of what unshielded matter could survive. The kinetic slugs were long and narrow, made from a dense alloy that the coalition's onboard analysts would spend weeks trying to identify afterward. They did not glow. They did not leave bright trails. They simply moved, and then they arrived, and when they arrived, everything changed. Draknor shields were designed for energy. The shield systems used by the Supremacy were among the most advanced in the known galaxy. They had been refined over 400 years of warfare. An energy weapon that hit a Draknor shield would spread across it, absorbed and dispersed. Even very powerful coalition energy weapons, the heavy beam arrays on their largest ships, struggled to punch through Draknor shielding. It was a problem the coalition had been fighting for decades. The kinetic slugs did not care about the shields. On the first Draknor destroyer in line, a midweight vessel called the Hammer of Voreth, 15 years old and fully combat-proven, took 3 impacts in the space of 4 seconds. The shields held against the first one, straining and flickering in a way its crew had never seen before. The second impact came before the shield could restabilize. The third came before the second had even finished. The shields collapsed. Hammer and the third slug punched through the destroyer's port engine housing and came out the other side. The ship did not explode immediately. It listed hard to port, venting atmosphere, its engines gone. It drifted. It was out of the fight. 3 ships further down the Draknor line suffered similar hits in the first 10 seconds of the engagement. Not destroyed, disabled. Precisely, efficiently, professionally disabled. On the Draknor command ship, the reports came in so fast that Warlord Grath's officers were struggling to keep up. 4 ships disabled, Warlord. The weapons being used by the Terran fleet are... We do not have a category for them. They appear to be high-velocity kinetic projectiles. Our shields are not rated for this kind of impact. Grath stared at his display. The amusement was gone from his face. Adjust shield harmonics. Route more power to the forward arrays. We are trying, Warlord, but the impacts come too fast. Or the shield cannot restabilize between hits. Then move. Get the fleet moving. He straightened to his full height. His voice was harder now, controlled anger underneath a thin layer of command discipline. Flanking maneuver. Split the formation. Drive around their line from both sides and get our heavy artillery ships into position. Fire on those Terran vessels. The Draknor fleet began to move. Aboard the TNS Iron Horizon, Lieutenant Cha Junho watched the movement on the tactical display and felt something inside him settle. He had run this scenario in simulation 14 times. He had run almost exactly this response from a tactically competent enemy, 12 of those 14 times. He had told Commander Kang Mirai about it in the pre-engagement briefing. A capable opponent, facing unexpected weapons, would try to flank. They always tried to flank. They're splitting, he said, his voice even. Left group moving on bearing 042. Right group bearing 277. Matches simulation variant 6. Kang Mirai did not look surprised. Response is planned. Outer picket groups rotate to intercept. Signal the wing commanders. The Terran formation shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that looked panicked or reactive. The outer ships on both sides simply changed their angle, smoothly and immediately, or as if they had been waiting for exactly this instruction, because they had been. When the Draknor flanking groups came around the edges of the engagement zone, they found Terran ships already there, waiting. The flanking destroyers opened fire. Their energy weapons slashed toward the Terran picket vessels. Terran point defense grids opened up, rapid-fire systems that filled the space with interceptor rounds, catching a significant portion of the incoming fire before it reached the hulls. In what got through hit armor that was layered differently than anything the Draknor had fired on before. Not the standard single-plate system, but an overlapping angled design that directed impact force sideways across the surface, rather than straight inward. The Terran ships took hits. Some took damage. One of the smaller picket vessels, the TNS Quick Current, lost its forward weapons array in a direct energy strike. But none of them broke. None of them ran. They held their intercept positions and kept firing. Ambassador Velshan stood at the edge of the bridge and watched the battle on the display. He had studied enough military history to understand what he was seeing, at least in broad terms. What he could not entirely process was the pace of it. The decisions were coming so fast, and the responses were coming faster. He looked at Cha Junho. The young lieutenant was working constantly, his hands moving across his console, or his eyes flicking between 3 screens, his mouth occasionally delivering quiet, specific instructions to the wing commanders through his comlink. He never hesitated. He never paused to think. Every response was immediate and sure. How does he know what to do so quickly? Velshan asked the officer standing beside him, a quiet ensign named Juan, who had been assigned to keep the ambassador informed. Juan looked at Cha Junho with something like pride. So, he has run the simulations more times than anyone else in the fleet, Juan said. The commander said he runs them in his sleep. When the real battle matches a simulation, he already knows the answer. He does not need to think. He just remembers. The Draknor heavy artillery ships had moved into position now. These were the real threat. Long-range energy cannon platforms, the kind that had been hammering coalition ships from a safe distance for the last 9 hours. They were massive, slow, shorty and difficult to maneuver, but their weapons had a range advantage that most other ships in the engagement could not match. They opened fire on the Terran Central Formation. The energy blasts were enormous, focused columns of superheated plasma, each one capable of gutting a coalition cruiser from end to end. They hit the Terran formation and, for a moment, the display went brilliant with impact flares. When the light faded, the Terran formation was still there. It had shifted. Several ships had moved during the firing sequence, angling away or behind each other, using the layered formation to ensure that most ships had a neighboring vessel between themselves and the artillery line. A handful of Terran ships had taken direct hits. Their armor had held against the first impact. Their systems were strained. They needed time. Time Kang Mirai decided to give them by removing the artillery ships from the equation. Target the Draknor artillery platforms, she said. You want torpedo wings, full deployment, adaptive pattern. From the belly of 4 of the Terran heavy vessels, torpedo bays opened. What came out looked at first like ordinary torpedoes. They accelerated toward the Draknor artillery ships on straight approach vectors. The Draknor point defense systems tracked them and began firing. Some of the torpedoes were hit. They exploded at distance, harmless. But the ones that were missed, the ones that the point defense systems had tracked and then lost, they were fired at and calculated as destroyed. Those ones did not keep coming straight. They changed direction. Small, sharp adjustments, responses to the jamming, and intercept signals being thrown at them by the Draknor systems. They went around. They came from angles that the point defense systems had not reoriented to cover. 2 artillery ships died in the first torpedo wave. Not disabled, destroyed. The adaptive torpedoes had found the parts of the ships that were not armored. The heat venting systems, the thruster housings, the junction points between the ship's sections, and hit them precisely. The other artillery ships began trying to move. Big, slow, and now terrified. On the command ship, Warlord Grath watched the battle with a face that had gone from satisfied to concerned to something that was approaching, but had not yet fully become alarm. He was a veteran. He had fought in 40 engagements. He knew how to read a battle. What he was reading right now made him uncomfortable in a way he had not felt in many years. The Terran fleet was not fighting the way any fleet he had ever encountered fought. Most species, when they entered a battle, fell into patterns. Aggressive patterns, defensive patterns, the habits of their military tradition. You could predict them after the first few exchanges. You learned what they defaulted to under pressure, and then you planned around it. The Terrans had no pattern, or rather, when their torpedoes had done something that should not have been possible. And through all of it, the Terran line had not shifted its overall position by more than a few hundred kilometers. What are they doing? He said aloud. His tactical officer hesitated. Warlord, our best analysis is that they are waiting. They are reacting to our moves but not pressing in advance of their own. They are holding position. Why? No one answered. No one had an answer. Grath thought about it for a long moment. The Terrans were holding position. They were between his fleet and the withdrawing coalition ships. They were not trying to destroy him. Not yet. They were blocking. They were holding the line and letting the coalition get clear. They were covering a retreat. Once the coalition fleet was safely behind them, what would the Terrans do then? The question bothered him in a way he could not fully articulate. He had laughed at these people 1 hour ago. He had written them off as primitives playing at war. Now he had 4 disabled destroyers, 2 destroyed artillery platforms, a flanking maneuver that had produced no result, and his artillery ships were scattering in fear of torpedoes that could think. How many of our ships have they destroyed? He asked. 2 destroyed, 6 disabled. He breathed slowly. How many of theirs have we disabled? Another pause. 3, Warlord. All minor damage. All still operational. Grath said nothing for a long time. He watched his display. He watched the Terran formation, still holding, still precise, still impossibly patient. He picked up the direct channel to Draknor High Command. It was a channel he had never used in the middle of an active engagement before. "This is Grath," he said. "I need to inform High Command that the situation in the Varath sector has changed. The Terran fleet is not what we expected." He paused. He thought carefully about how to say the next part. "I recommend we request reinforcement before the next phase of the engagement." On the other end of the channel, there was silence. Then High Command responded. "Reinforcement? You have a superior force, Grath. Deal with the primitives." Grath looked at the display. He looked at the dead artillery ships. For he looked at the Terran formation, still holding, still waiting. "You have not seen what they can do," he said quietly. Behind him, another report came in. The coalition fleet had finished its withdrawal. Every remaining coalition vessel was now safely behind the Terran line. Grath closed the channel and turned back to his display. The Terran fleet was still holding. He stared at that patient, unmoving formation, and for the first time in 40 years of fighting, Warlord Grath felt something move in the back of his mind. Not panic, something quieter and colder than panic. He felt the first faint edge of genuine fear, and outside in the dark and the silence, the Terran fleet waited, patient, ready, as if this was exactly where they had always planned to be. The first phase of the battle ended the way most first phases do, not with a decisive blow, but with exhaustion on both sides and a mutual, unspoken agreement to pause. The Draknor fleet pulled back to a distance beyond easy weapons range and regrouped. The Terran formation held its position, making no move to pursue. In the space between the two fleets, debris drifted slowly, the broken remains of ships that had not survived the last 2 hours. Most of it was Draknor, some of it was not. Aboard the TNS Iron Horizon, the pause felt like taking a breath after running. The bridge crew did not relax exactly, but some of the tension left the room. Our shoulders dropped slightly. People drank water. A few of the younger officers allowed themselves to exhale long and slow. Commander Kang Mirai did not sit down. She never seemed to sit during an engagement. But she did step away from the main display for a few minutes, standing at one of the side windows and looking out at the debris field in silence. Lieutenant Chijunho ran diagnostic checks across the fleet systems. The Iron Horizon itself had taken 3 energy weapon impacts in the second phase of the fighting. The armor had held on 2 of them. The third had damaged one of the secondary weapons arrays on the port side. The array was being repaired now. The crew working on it had not stopped since the hit. Below the engagement zone on the surface of Varath 7, there was no pause. The moon of Varath 7 was a gray, cold place, low gravity, thin atmosphere, or a surface covered in flat stone plains broken up by long ridges of darker rock that jutted up like broken teeth. There was nothing beautiful about it, but there was something on its surface that mattered. A signal relay station, a large structure of towers and antenna arrays that managed communications across the entire Varath sector. Whoever controlled that station controlled the ability of every fleet in the sector to talk to each other clearly and without interference. The Draknor had tried to take it 4 hours ago. They had landed a ground force on the moon's surface. 3,000 soldiers, armored and equipped, with heavy weapons and close air support from Draknor gunships hovering at low altitude. What they had found was Corporal Park Yunbi. Not just her. There were 230 Terran Marines on the surface, deployed from 2 of the Terran fleet's ground support vessels at the same time the main fleet had entered the engagement zone. But Corporal Park Yunbi was where the hardest fighting was, at the base of the main relay tower, where the Draknor ground force was pushing hardest. She was 26 years old. She was not tall and not particularly imposing. She had a round face that her squad mates said made her look younger than she was, and dark eyes that made everyone who knew her well say the opposite. She had joined the Terran Defense Forces at 18, straight out of secondary school, mirroring when the first recruitment drives for the new fleet had gone out. She had spent the last 8 years training for exactly this kind of situation. The Draknor pushed. She pushed back. The fighting at the base of the tower was close and brutal. The open stone plain that surrounded the relay station gave no natural cover, so both sides had brought their own. Terran Marines worked behind portable shield barriers. Not energy shields, physical ones. Heavy plates of reinforced composite material that absorbed weapons fire and could be repositioned quickly. They moved in tight, coordinated groups, covering each other, never leaving a gap in their defensive line for long. Draknor soldiers fought differently. They were individually larger, individually stronger, and individually harder to put down. A standard Draknor soldier was nearly 2 meters tall, heavily muscled, and wore armor that was dense and thick. And they were used to advancing through fire by sheer endurance. Other species got out of their way when they charged. It was a tactic that had worked for 400 years. It was not working as well today. Terran weapons, like Terran ship weapons, had been built on different principles. The rifles the Marines carried used a variant of the same high-velocity kinetic principle as the ship guns. They fired fast and hard and Draknor armor, while excellent against energy-based infantry weapons. It was not rated for the impact density of what the Terran guns produced. It did not shred Draknor armor instantly, but it cracked it. It stressed it, and cracked, stressed armor, hit repeatedly in the same place, eventually failed. Corporal Park Yunbi had worked this out in the first 10 minutes of the ground engagement. She had passed the observation to her squad, and they had adjusted their fire discipline accordingly. Pick a target, hit it in the same spot. Keep hitting it until it stops moving. It was slow and it took patience, but it worked. Her squad was down to 9 people from 12. She was not thinking about the 3 they had lost. She was thinking about the next 6 minutes, because 6 minutes was as far ahead as she could afford to think right now. "They are pulling back from the left," said Private Shin Jionu, flat on his stomach behind a barrier, looking through a range scope. "The left group is falling back." "Because the right group is moving around," Park said. She had seen this before. It was the 3rd time they had tried this pattern. "Ryu, take your half to the junction point. They will come around the 2nd ridge. You have 3 minutes." Sergeant Ryu Myung-soo said understood, without any unnecessary words, and moved, taking 4 Marines with him at a crouch run along the base of the relay tower. Park turned her attention back to the left group. If they were falling back, they were doing it for a reason. Either they were genuinely withdrawing, or they were giving the right group time to flank, or both. She watched the space where the left group had been and counted. 7 seconds later, the gunship came over the ridge. She had been waiting for it. "Scatter!" she shouted, and her Marines moved instantly, every one of them diving away from the barriers in a different direction. The gunship's strafing fire cut across the position they had occupied a half-second before. Barriers exploded. Stone chips flew. Park rolled behind a rock formation and came up with a short, heavy launcher on her shoulder. She tracked the gunship as it came around for a second pass, leading its movement slightly, and fired. The round hit the gunship under its forward engine housing, not enough to destroy it, but enough to crack the engine casing and start a cascade fault in the thrust system. The gunship banked hard, fighting to stay level, and retreated back over the ridge, trailing dark smoke. "Back to position," Park said. She was already moving. 9 people. They were 9 people, holding a relay tower that the entire battle in orbit depended on, against 3,000. She did not think about the numbers. Numbers were for afterward. Above, on the TNS Iron Horizon, Admiral Seo Jinha had come aboard. He had made the crossing in a shuttle during the pause in the space battle, sure at Kang Mirai's invitation. He stood on the bridge now, looking around at the ship that had arrived when no one else had, and he did not know exactly what to say. He was not a man who lacked for words. He had been in the Coalition Defense Fleet for 30 years. He had made speeches, delivered orders, written reports, and held conversations with alien species of 17 different kinds. But standing here, on a ship that should not have existed in the hands of a civilization that everyone in the galaxy had written off, he found that the usual words were not adequate. Kang Mirai gave him a few minutes to look before she spoke. Then she said, "Admiral, how are your people?" "Recovering," he said. "We lost a lot of ships. The crews are. It has been a difficult night." He turned to look at her. "You have been monitoring the surface situation?" "Continuously." She nodded toward a secondary display where the ground engagement was tracked. "Your Corporal Park's squad is holding the relay station. They are taking pressure. We have orbital fire support tasked to their position if they call for it, but they have not called yet." Seo Jinha looked at the display. He watched the tracking dots moving on the moon's surface. 9 Marines. He exhaled slowly. "They are remarkable," he said. not entirely sure if he meant Park Squad specifically or the Terrans in general. Perhaps both. They are trained, Kang Mirai said. It was not a modest answer exactly. It was a precise one. He turned and looked at her directly. I need to say something, and I am going to say it plainly because I think you are someone who appreciates plain speech. He paused. 8 years ago, I sat on the Coalition Review Board that considered Earth's application. I voted to deny it. I believed at that time that your species was not ready, that your history of conflict made you a risk. He was quiet for a moment. I was wrong, and I am sorry. Kang Mirai looked at him. Her expression was hard to read. It was not warm, and it was not cold. It was simply steady. I appreciate that, she said. Can I ask what you thought when the decision came down, when we turned you away? She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. We were disappointed, she said. When some people were angry, some people said it was confirmation that the galaxy would never accept us, that we should stop trying. She paused. But most of us, the ones who ended up here, we thought something different. We thought that if no one was going to invite us to the table, we should build a bigger table. He almost smiled. Is that why you came today? Not for the coalition, but because it was simply the right thing to do? Yes, she said. There was no hesitation, no diplomacy in it. Just a fact. He nodded slowly. He looked back at the display, at the Draknor fleet regrouping in the distance. What happens now? Cha Junho answered before Kang Mirai could, because his display had just updated with something that changed the question entirely. Commander, he said quietly. His voice was flat and careful. New contacts, long range, bearing, he checked twice, bearing 180 by positive 22, emergent signatures. Multiple large vessels. Kang Mirai crossed to him in 4 steps. She looked at his display. The contacts were still resolving, but the mass displacement readings were already showing clearly. And the number. The new fleet was twice the size of the one they had already been fighting. The Draknor had called for reinforcement. The real Draknor war fleet, the force Grath had told High Command he needed, was arriving. When at the center of the formation was a signal signature that the fleet database identified immediately. The personal flagship of Draknor Supreme Commander Vorath, the most powerful Draknor leader in the field. He had come himself. The bridge was silent for a moment. Velshan, still standing at the observation position, gripped the console edge again. Seo Jinha's jaw tightened. Several of the younger bridge officers exchanged glances. No one said anything. Yes, but the weight of the new information settled across the room like weather coming in. Kang Mirai stared at the display for a long, quiet moment. She read the numbers. She looked at the fleet composition. She processed it the way she processed everything, completely and without panic. Then she turned to Cha Junho. How does this compare to Simulation Variant 12? She asked. Cha Junho pulled up the data without needing to think about it. He checked the incoming fleet's mass displacement, a number of vessels and formation type against the simulation model. He looked up. It is larger than Variant 12, Commander, but the formation approach and composition are within projected parameters. She nodded. She turned to look at the display one more time. 287 Draknor ships, with more appearing every minute. Supreme Commander Vorath, personally, coming to end this. Seo Jinha watched her face for some sign of what she was thinking. He saw nothing that looked like fear. He saw something that looked, if anything, like focus sharpening further. She opened the fleet-wide channel. Her voice went out to every Terran ship in the engagement zone, every bridge crew, every weapons officer, every engineer and marine and pilot in the fleet. This is Commander Kang Mirai. A second Draknor force has entered the sector. It is larger than the first. Supreme Commander Vorath is personally commanding. She paused for exactly 1 second. We are going to hold our position and let them come to us. All ships run complete system checks and report readiness. We finish this tonight. She closed the channel. Then she looked at Seo Jinha and said, with the same calm, steady voice she used for everything, Admiral, I recommend you get your ships into formation behind us. What comes next will be difficult, but we plan for it. Seo Jinha looked at the display. He looked at the approaching armada. He looked at this woman who had come from a planet that the galaxy had rejected, with a fleet that the galaxy had not known existed, and who was now preparing to fight the most powerful military force the Draknor supremacy could put in the field. He straightened. He reached for his own communication channel. "This is Admiral Seo Jinha," he said. "All coalition vessels, form up behind the Terran line. Weapons to readiness. We fight alongside our allies." The word felt right. Allies. And they should have been that 8 years ago. Outside, the stars began to fill with the dark shapes of the coming fleet. The real battle was about to begin. Supreme Commander Vorath was not a patient creature. He was large, even by Draknor standards, a full head taller than Warlord Grath, with a wider frame and heavier armor that he wore at all times, even aboard his flagship, as a statement rather than a necessity. His skin was darker than Grath's, nearly black, and his eyes were a deep amber that caught light in a way that made him look perpetually angry. He had commanded the Draknor military for 12 years, had won 17 major engagements, and had never lost a battle that he personally entered. He intended this to continue. He had listened to Grath's report with a silence that communicated, very clearly, that he found the whole situation embarrassing. Grath was a good warlord, one of the better ones. The fact that he had called for reinforcement against a species that had been rejected from the Galactic Coalition on grounds of primitiveness was not a good look. Vorath had said this, not unkindly, before taking over command. Now he stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Supremacy Eternal, and looked at the Terran formation. He had studied the engagement data from the first phase carefully during his approach. He understood what had happened. The kinetic weapons, the adaptive torpedoes, and the formation discipline. He had made notes. He had adjusted his approach accordingly. He was going to hit them from every direction at once. The Draknor combined fleet, Grath's original force, now repaired and reorganized, plus Vorath's fresh armada, outnumbered the Terran fleet nearly 3-1. Even accounting for the Terran weapons advantage, mass and numbers always told in the end. Vorath was going to spread his fleet in a wide envelope formation, while surrounding the Terran position on all sides simultaneously, and compress inward until there was nowhere left to maneuver. It was a simple plan. It did not require anything clever. It just required numbers, and he had numbers. "Begin the advance," he said. The Draknor fleet moved. On the TNS Iron Horizon, Cha Yunho watched the Draknor formation spread and felt a complicated mixture of emotions. On one hand, it was almost exactly what he had expected. On the other hand, seeing it happen in real space, with real ships that would really try to kill everyone aboard his vessel, was different from watching it happen on a simulation screen. He set the feeling aside. There was no space for it right now. "Envelope formation," he reported. "They are spreading on all axes. Estimate full encirclement position in 14 minutes. Kang Mirai was at the main display. She was watching the Draknor formation with the same complete, unblinking attention she gave to everything. The moment came for action. She was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to take on the challenge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her determination was unwavering. When the moment came for action, she was always ready to the moment came for action. She was always ready. 14 minutes, she said. She looked at the display. Cha Junho. Run the Gaesung protocol. The bridge went very still for a moment. Cha Junho looked up from his console. The full protocol, Commander. The full protocol. He turned back to his console and began working. His hands were moving quickly, pulling up stored tactical programs, sending encoded signals to every ship in the Terran fleet simultaneously. The Gaesung protocol was something they had built and refined over years of simulation. It was named after a city on Earth, a place that had existed for a long time at a difficult crossroads between competing powers. The name was Kang Mirai's choice. She had a sense of history. The protocol was not a single tactic. It was a sequence. A carefully designed sequence that used the Terran fleet's formation, flexibility, and communication speed to execute a trap that required every ship to know its exact role and execute it without hesitation. In simulation, it worked 11 times out of 14. The 3 times it failed were when the enemy formation was different from what was expected. Vorith's envelope formation was exactly what the protocol had been designed for. The trap worked like this. The Terran fleet would stage a controlled retreat, not a panic, not a rout. A deliberate, organized fallback along a specific axis, pulling away from one side of the incoming envelope in a way that made it look like the Terran formation was weakening on that side. An enemy pressing an encirclement would always push harder where they saw weakness. They would compress their forces on that side, chasing the apparent retreat, pulling their formation out of even spacing. And when the formation was uneven, when ships had been pulled out of position to chase, the rest of the Terran fleet would hit from 3 sides simultaneously against the thinner sections. The trick was that the retreating section had to do exactly what it was supposed to do. No variations, no flinching. It had to look like a genuine retreat right up until the moment it stopped being one. Fleet signal sent, Cha Junho said. Air all wing commanders confirm receipt and readiness. Signal the coalition vessels, Kang Mirai said. She looked at Admiral Seo Jinha, who had remained on the bridge. Admiral, we will need your ships for the closing movement. The 3rd wing on the right. Your commanders will receive the timing signals from Lieutenant Cha. They need to move when they receive them, not before and not after. Exactly when? Seo Jinha nodded. He looked at her for a moment. Yeah, they will. The Draknor envelope continued to close. 10 minutes. 8. The forward elements of Vorath's fleet were visible now on the external visual feeds, dark bronze shapes filling the far distance. Begin the staged withdrawal, Kang Mirai said. Left section, now. 22 Terran ships on the left side of the formation began to pull back. They fired as they went, covering their own movement, keeping their faces toward the enemy. But they were clearly moving away from the closing Draknor left wing. On the Draknor command ship, Vorath watched this with sharp attention. Their left is falling back, his tactical officer reported. Vorath studied the movement. Is it a staged retreat? Unknown, Supreme Commander. The movement is organized, not panicked, but they may have damage on that side that we are not aware of. Vorath looked at the gap that was opening on the Terran left. If he drove hard into that gap, why, he could cut the Terran formation in 2. A split formation was a dead formation. Push the left wing forward, he ordered. Maximum advance speed. Drive into that gap. I want it widened before they can compensate. The Draknor left wing surged forward. Ships that had been spread in the envelope pulled toward the gap, accelerating, chasing the retreating Terran vessels. The even spacing of the envelope fractured on the left side as ships rushed to exploit the apparent weakness. Tsuchijuna watched the spacing change on his display. He was counting. He had a very specific number in his head. The degree to which the Draknor left wing needed to be out of position before the protocol could execute. He watched the spacing. He counted. Now, he said quietly. The retreating Terran ships stopped retreating. They stopped so suddenly and completely that for a moment the Draknor ships chasing them seemed to hesitate, as if they could not process what they were seeing. The 22 Terran vessels that had been falling back turned, weapons hot, and drove directly into the face of the pursuing Draknor wing. At the same moment, the Terran right wing and the coalition ships under Seo Jinha's flag drove hard against the thinned Draknor right side, the section that had lost spacing when ships had rushed to fill the left push. The Terran center drove forward against the Draknor front. 3 simultaneous strikes, against a formation that had been pulled out of even spacing, against a fleet that had been moving fast in one direction and could not quickly redirect. The Draknor left wing hit the turned Terran ships and ran directly into a wall of kinetic fire at close range. Shields that had already been stressed in the first phase collapsed faster now. Ships that had been accelerating forward had no time to decelerate before they were in the kill zone. The close-range kinetic impacts were devastating. On the Draknor right side, thin and caught mid-movement, faced coalition and Terran ships hitting from outside the envelope. It buckled quickly. The spacing gap that the protocol had created was now a gap in the Draknor defensive formation, and ships were pushing through it. On the moon below, Corporal Park Yunbi heard the change in the orbital battle through the communication channel that fed directly to her earpiece. She did not understand all of it, but she understood enough. The Terrans were pushing, the Draknor were breaking. Around her, the Draknor ground force had already begun to show signs of the demoralization that happens when soldiers feel that the battle above them is going wrong. Their advance had slowed. Their coordination had fragmented. 2 of the gunships that had been providing air support had broken off and were moving away from the relay station, pulled back for some reason she could not see. She did not wait for a better opportunity. "Forward," she said to her squad. "We take the outer perimeter back. Move." 9 tired, dirty Marines in cracked armor rose from cover and moved forward. They did not run. They advanced steadily, methodically, the way they had been trained to, covering each other, pushing the Draknor ground forces back step by step from the relay tower they had held for hours against impossible numbers. The Draknor ground force, already pulled apart by the deteriorating situation above and by 9 Marines who had refused to break all night, did not hold. In space, the battle's turning point had been reached. Vorath knew it. He had watched the trap close around him with a kind of cold, furious clarity. He had identified the stage retreat too late. His left wing was in disarray, caught between the turned Terran ships and the debris of its own failed pursuit. His right was being pushed through. His center was fully engaged in taking losses it could not absorb indefinitely. He was not going to lose all of these ships. Retreat was painful. It was humiliating. But the alternative was destruction. He reached for the command channel. Before he could speak, an incoming signal light opened. A hail from the Terran flagship. He stared at it for a moment, then accepted it. Kang Mirai's face appeared on his screen. She looked exactly the same as she had looked, he imagined. At the start of the engagement, calm, still, as if the last several hours had cost her nothing. "Supreme Commander Vorath," she said, "I believe we have reached a point where further losses serve neither of us well. I am prepared to offer your fleet the opportunity to withdraw." She paused. "All Draknor forces must leave coalition space immediately and completely. No conditions beyond that. You leave, the battle ends." He stared at her. He had expected victory tonight. He had come personally to end this embarrassment quickly and decisively, and instead he was looking at the face of a human, telling him to leave. He thought about refusing. He thought about counterattacking. He looked at his casualty figures and thought about the numbers he would have to explain to the Draknor ruling council when he returned home. "You would let us leave," he said, "after all of this?" I did not come here to destroy you, she said simply. I came here to stop you. And there is a difference. He was quiet for a long moment. Understood, he said. And then, because he was Vorith, and he had his pride even now, he closed the channel without another word. The order went out across the Draknor fleet. Withdrawal. Full and immediate. The Draknor ships began to pull back. Those that could still move disengaged and turned. Those that were too damaged were left drifting, their crews alive, and the Terran ships did not fire on them. The battle, which had consumed the Varath sector for hours, went quiet. The silence that followed was the strangest kind. The kind that comes after enormous noise. The kind that takes a moment to feel real. On the TNS Iron Horizon, the bridge crew sat with it for a few seconds. Then Cha Junho quietly said, Draknor fleet is withdrawing on all vectors. No new attack signatures. He paused. It's over, Commander. Kang Mirai stood at the main display and watched the Draknor fleet go. She watched until the last of the bronze shapes had disappeared from scanner range. Then she lowered her head for a moment, very briefly, and exhaled. Admiral Seo Jinha stepped up beside her. He looked at the display, the debris field, the empty space where the Draknor had been, the Terran formation, still holding, still intact. We should never have turned you away, he said. His voice was low and sincere. Kang Mirai straightened. She looked at him steadily. No, she said. Aren't you shouldn't have. On the moon's surface, Corporal Park Yunbi sat down for the first time in 11 hours. She sat on the cold stone at the base of the relay tower they had held, and she looked up through the thin atmosphere at the stars where the battle had been fought. Her squad sat around her, silent and exhausted. 3 of them had injuries that needed real medical attention. All of them needed sleep. All of them needed food and warmth and quiet. Private Shin Yeonu sat down beside her, and he looked up at the same stars. Did we win? He asked. She thought about it for a second. Yeah, she said. We won. He nodded slowly. Good, he said, and said nothing else. 3 days later, a message arrived at the headquarters of the Galactic Coalition Council. It came from the Terran flagship, transmitted formally through official channels, with the proper headers and registration codes. It was brief. It contained no demands and no conditions. It was simply a document with a header at the top that read, Application for membership in the Galactic Coalition. Earth, second submission. The Council convened an emergency session. Representatives of 37 member worlds attended. The debate that was expected to take days lasted 6 hours. There was a great deal of talking about what had been witnessed in the Varath sector, about the fleet that had come from nowhere, nigh about the species that had been told to leave and had spent 8 years building something extraordinary in the quiet of their own solar system, about the fact that when no one else came, they came. The vote was taken. 37-4-0 against. The message that went back to the TNS Iron Horizon was also brief. It read, Welcome. Kang Mirai read it once, nodded, and handed the screen back to her communications officer without ceremony. Cha Junho watched her from his station. Today, how do you feel, Commander? She looked at the display, at the stars of the Varith sector, at the quiet dark where the battle had been fought. The same as before, she said. And in the way she said it, Cha Junho understood that this was true, and also that it was the most important thing about her, about all of them. They had not come for a reward. They had not built the fleet to earn a seat at the table. They had come because it was right, and they had built because it was necessary. And what the galaxy thought about them afterward had never been the point. The point had been out there, in the dark, in the long hours when nobody else came, and they had come anyway.